Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Coffin. I'm here to host Attitude Magazine's weekly ADHD Experts broadcast. Welcome back to all of you returning listeners, and welcome to our new listeners as well. This week, we're switching directions after a really wonderful 3-month series of webinars on school and learning. We'll be turning, starting today, to strategies for adults with ADHD. And to kick off this little mini series of adult ADHD webinars, we are super pleased to welcome Peggy Ramundo today to share lessons and insights from her 3 decades of working with adults with ADHD. If you don't know Peggy, she is a pioneer in the ADHD space. In the 30 years since her son was diagnosed with ADHD, she's become one of the leaders in the field and a speaker on the condition, both for children as well as adults. Her book, co-authored with Kate Kelly, was one of the first and super essential ADHD books for adults called, love this title, You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Stupid, or Crazy? This is a book that's now in its 2nd edition. It's something that any adult with ADHD is going to want to read. For the past 16 years, Peggy has been working with adults diagnosed with ADHD as a senior certified ADHD coach. So today we'll be hearing a number of strategies that she's gleaned from those 3 decades of hands-on experience working with adults with ADHD. She gave us a couple of tidbits, which I'll just give to you now, just as from her upcoming presentation, just to pique your interest. Not everything you believe to be true is actually true, and reframing is a powerful tool for interrupting the cycle of unexamined thinking. That's one. Another one, which I love, is as you compile to-do lists, consider this: we are human beings, not human doings. And then a third, you have the right to make mistakes, to be responsible for mistakes, and to learn from them. And finally, time is not a tyrant to be tamed. Time is life. It's who we are, it's who we should be, it's what we do. So those are just some of the kinds of thoughts that Peggy's going to talk about more. And then she's also going to touch on the latest research in biology and its ramifications for adults with ADHD and what it means for us to change who we are and to create healthy and joyous lives. So Peggy, thank you so much for being here today. We're so looking forward to your talk. And
thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Just a few housekeeping tips before Peggy speaks. Please post your questions in the box on your control panel at any time. Love to hear any notes you want to add there about who you are and what your special interests are and why you're here today. Just go ahead and throw those into the control box. Peggy's going to present her slide presentation probably for a half an hour or so, and after that finishes, she'll answer as many questions as she has time for. If you have problems hearing us, please dial in via your phone line. You'll see the phone number in your control panel. Audio problems are almost always due to your internet connection, and by dialing in, you can get a direct line in. If you'd like to take notes while Peggy's speaking, please download her slides now. They're in the handout section. You'll see that on your control panel. Or after the session ends, if you want to replay, listen to it again, the presentation again, have a friend listen, sometimes a spouse, you'll find it on attitudemag.com/webinars, including the slides if you want to download those at that point. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Peggy to get started. And thanks again for being here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really happy to be here. I just want to make a quick comment about the timing, in that I have combined what I want to present with a few slides. So it's not going to be as many slides as typically are included, but I will try to keep my comments and the slides within about 30 minutes, which is hard. Anybody who knows me knows that that's very hard for me to do because I tend to love to talk a lot. So I will keep one eye on the clock and try not to do that. So here we have it. I'm glad that you're listening in, and I hope that you find it helpful. I want to start out with, and the reason why I'm starting out with this is the picture that you have in front of you of thinking thought is what I've called it, because this really is sort of the central at least my central aha that I've taken over these many years of working with ADD, and it's been a very interesting ride that started with my son's diagnosis and then mine a year later. And what had been my life journey suddenly got turned on its head and became my ADD journey. And it's been a wonderful ride so far. And the reason I'm starting with this is because one of the things that has become clear to me in my work is that much of what we do, much of what my clients do, much of what everyone does, people do, is speak to, talk about their thoughts. And the first thing that I think is critical is to step back and take a look at how those thoughts are formulated. Where do those thoughts come from? Whose thoughts are they? Because they feel real. When we see something, and that's what I wanted you to look at this chart, we have a thought or a belief in our head, and this is circular, so it goes round and round. So something happened before, there was a thought or a belief, which leads to feelings, and those feelings lead to action or some kind of a response, and wrapped up in there often is assumptions. Sometimes the assumptions come first if this is an initial interaction of some sort. After the feelings, that may directly lead to assumptions. But ordinarily, we're processing and we're cycling all the time, recycling old stuff. And this is the way it happens. We think that what is happening out there. It's not. It's happening inside. And what that means is we have much more power than we think we do. Ordinarily, we see something happening, we have feelings about it, we make up something, we make a story about it. And this is where you'll hear somebody saying, well, he made me. I wouldn't have been late if Dr. Brown hadn't. We're looking out there to assign blame or responsibility for something that we have interpreted in a certain way. In reality, nobody is making you do that. And I say nobody. Of course, we have jobs and responsibilities and so forth. But in terms of a concept, it's not happening out there. It is not an external process. It's an internal one. And that is critical, I believe, to almost everything, to almost all the work that we try to do in creating lives for us, ourselves at work, is understanding how this happens. Because we arrive in adulthood with all kinds of ideas, ways that we've interpreted things. We have a whole system in place about who did what to whom and whose fault it is, and we have a sense of not having a lot of control over what happens in our lives. And over the years, as I've gotten to know more and more adults, I have been so impressed by how many have come for help, even though they arrive with so much baggage, baggage that they believe is true about them. So keep this chart in mind and think about it. Step back and consider what I'm saying. In practice, the next time you're observing something and find yourself going to that same old thinking about, my goodness, he must have taught his son to whatever. Step back a minute and wait a second. He's not telling me that. Nobody's making me think this. These thoughts are coming from my own head, from my own thoughts, and my job is to try to figure out why. What's sourcing these thoughts? Why have I come to these assumptions? So this is a good place for us to start, I believe, and that's why I've included this first. Let me just back up one second. What we need to do to create a fulfilling life, and that's what we're about. Adults who get into ADD coaching or counseling or therapy or just doing their own self-work are doing it because they don't feel like they are living a fulfilled life. They may not be able to define what that is, but they want to live a fulfilled life. And to do that, we have to be at choice. So we need to think about how we are filtering the experiences of our life and then make that shift that I talked about so that you will, in fact, have control over where you're going in your life. And one of the things that really hangs us up, and I think it's not just us, I think that it is the crazy modern world that we live in, is time or the lack thereof. And of course, what we try to do is fit in so many to-dos into that time that is allotted to us. And, you know, time is limited. Time is what it is. It is just a concept, however. It feels like time is some sort of an oppressive, mean-spirited tyrant who is making our lives miserable. In fact, back when I was doing a lot of presentations years ago, I would frequently speak on the topic of time and time management, and I often called it taming your time tyrant, and then spending most of our time talking about tips, tricks, and techniques to deal with our relationship with time and how there just never seems to be enough of it. And then, of course, to-dos, because that's all wrapped up together. And I'm going to come clean about something that I'm very embarrassed about, but I think it makes the point. It was about 15 years ago, and my then, 14, 15-year-old daughter was looking over my shoulder when I was putting my to-do list together. And she kept coming back and saying, "You're not done yet, you're not done yet." And finally, she walked a little closer, and her eyes got really big. And she said, "Mom, you are out of your mind. 92 items? 92 items on my to-do list." It really was a wake-up call for me. The insanity of what I was doing really got my attention. And in some respects, although it wasn't just that moment, that was one moment of many that started shifting my thinking about how am I approaching my life? How am I using the time of my life? And do I need to rethink that? And I think when it comes to your own to-dos, my guess is that many of you have a very long to-do list, and much of the stress that you feel every day comes from not getting those to-do lists done. And I came across an old transparency that I used to use. It was a transparency inspired by my then 7-year-old, who I was trying to rush around to get ready to go somewhere. And he put his hands on his hips and stared me down, and he said, "If you would stop rushing me, I could slow my mind down and remember what I need to do." And huge implications for us in adulthood. When we are rushing around feeling so stressed out, we can't think, we're not at our best, and what we come up with is not going to support us because we're not giving ourselves the time and space to make choices about, do I even want this in my life? Why is this in my life? And that's why when I was thinking this through, what I wanted to talk about, I thought about how important it is for us to reframe, and that's what we need to do about our thoughts, reframe the way we're thinking about them, and reframe our thinking about to-dos by asking yourselves the question, am I a human being or a human doing? And as long as you are lining your own daily activities up with a doing person, it's going to be very, very hard to find meaning in your life. We need to step back, celebrate, remember that first and foremost, we are human beings. And that means that there are values that we need to follow because they are intrinsic to who we are. We have belief systems in place, so much information within us that about who we are. And often what's left out of that is celebrating the amazing, amazing spirit that you are inside. And when we fail to do that, we end up with crazed, rushing through the world lives. So time isn't a tyrant. Time is nothing more than a frame within which we choose one activity over another, one choice over another. It frames our individual reality of who we are, who we shouldn't be, and what we do. But ordinarily, we don't step back and think through our relationship with time and what that relationship needs to be to get to that fulfilled life we want. So it's very difficult to make decisions that are proactive because we're flying by the seat of our pants, rushing through life. And what we need to do is stand back, step back, take a deep breath, really look at the to-dos in your life, and are they supporting that authentic person, that spirit that's inside you, or are they simply somebody else should? And very often that's what happens. If you look at your to-do list, you're going to find, I believe, many should. And those shoulds are somebody else's beliefs. And that's where that getting a handle on thinking is really important. They're not things you came up with. They're not beliefs you came up with. You're happy to abide by the dim bulb housekeeping rule, which is, don't worry about it too much. Turn the lights off. Dust a little bit is good enough. If instead your come from is, I want it on my tombstone that I was an absolutely perfect housekeeper, that might be coming from you, but my guess is it's somebody else's belief. So when we are thinking about the to-dos in our lives, it's really important that we remember that we are human beings. And that's where our decision-making needs to come from. That needs to be our come from. Time management needs to be life management so that there are moments to support our physical being, our spiritual being, our emotional needs, and we typically don't do that. So I just urge you to think through what your relationship with time is and why it is what it is, if you can get to that. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of work to dig through and figure out, why am I doing what I'm doing? Where did this come from? Whose ideas are these anyway? They're not mine. Important work to do. And it goes way beyond the tips, tricks, and techniques, which, trust me, and please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, those are very important for us. We need to have systems in place to help us deal with the challenge areas in our life. But I have shifted a great deal in my thinking over the years about this. I do not believe that is where we need to start, however, because when we start there, we leave out this whole big self-discovery process. And I believe that what we end up with is systems that work. We're better at getting on top, getting where we need to be, perhaps. We're not running late so much. We're checking off those to-dos. But I would submit that that's great. That helps you feel more successful about yourself. But is it really helping you to get in touch with why you're on this planet? Who are you? Who do you want to be? What do you value? What lights up your heart and soul? And I think that all too often, those questions are left out because of the crazy busyness in our lives. And that crazy busyness is not only not good in terms of it not supporting what we want in life, it also creates great damage to us physically. We know now that if our choices are always made according to rush, which puts us in a state of constant stress, that physiologically what's happening is our cortisol levels are chronically high. And that leads to all kinds of health problems with the heart, with the immune system, the rationale, if you need a reason to step back and make some decisions about these questions of time and to-dos, consider the fact that it's not just your emotional state I'm talking about and how you feel about yourself. I'm talking about your physical health. Would you change the slide, please? I sort of got ahead of myself here, but the quote down on the bottom is what I would really, is the seed that I want to plant that I would like you to think about. it only seems that there is something more important for you to do than to just quietly be yourself. And I think that for a variety of reasons, many of us we don't consider that question or that statement. We don't think about it because we have been conditioned. We have had a lot of shoulds put over us. We arrive in adulthood, many of us, not feeling very good about ourselves because we have these long histories of so-called mistakes, which I want to talk briefly about because I don't think mistakes are mistakes at all. But we often end up having had many people, authority figures, teachers, spouses, friends, whoever it is, really should on us about those mistakes that we keep making. And if you have ADD, you're going to make those quote-unquote mistakes because of the glitches in your brain. That's just what's so. That's not, and again, back to how do we interpret what's happening in our lives, that could be interpreted as you being irresponsible, you not taking charge of your life, you not caring about anybody but yourself. But the fact is, that is a faulty assumption. And people are going to have and make faulty assumptions. You can't change their thinking, but you can change your response to their thinking. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. So consider the fact of your own power in making choices about what you're going to believe and not believe. Whether you're going to take this should to heart or you're just going to make the personal decision that, you know what, I don't want this in my life. You have that power. Many of us don't realize that. And again, I've been at this for a very long time, decades. So some of what I'm telling you are my own personal ahas in my own journey. And a lot of that journey was a spiritual journey that I did with my co-author, who, if you're not aware, died in 2012. And that was a huge loss for me because we traveled together for decades. And much of what I'm talking to you about today comes out of experiences that I've had with other adults, with my clients, and learnings that I have from my experiences on my ADD journey with Kate. It was a wonderful part of my life. And I guess I'm urging you to not lose sight of that part within you that you probably don't touch often enough, but it's there. And it is your truth. And you've got to get past all that busyness to be able to find it. And again, I don't have a lot of time for techniques and systems, although I have a bushel basket of them. But just tossing them out very quickly, one of the ways to get underneath this time tyrant and change your relationship with time is the overall technique is to slow down. You have to work at interrupting the velocity of your life, which leads you to reactivity rather than an intentional place of growth. So slowing down, centering. This does not have to be some trip to the top of a mountain where you learn to meditate for 3 days. This can be 5-minute vacations. In fact, one of the first assignments that I give my clients is to go outside this week and spend at least an hour doing nothing. They will often come back over the years, have reported back to me that is the hardest homework they have ever had to do, because it is about really my playing devil's advocate here and saying, you know what, I want you to think differently. I'm not going to tell you you have to, but I want to see what comes out of these moments of not doing anything. Well, we're always doing something because we're always thinking, but when you put those to-do lists down and you're just sitting quietly and watching the clouds pass you by, what are you noticing about yourself? What's speaking to you? It might be a passion that you gave up. It might be some little spark of something that you've always wanted to do, but always gets shoved down over the busyness, under the busyness. So I just ask my clients to, If you can't do an hour, then do a half hour, but sometime this week, this is your homework, and you agreed when you came into coaching to be in charge, to take steps, to take risks, so I'm going to ask you to do this, and whether or not it's uncomfortable. And then I just want to hear back from you, what was the experience like? Did any ahas come up? And I believe that they will, if in the space of silence. And that space of silence means stay in the moment, because this is the only moment there really is. We don't think that way. We're always looking out and figuring out what's coming next, or we're looking in the rearview mirror, judging ourselves. But we're rarely in this very moment right this second. And mindfulness is a wonderful way of taking a look at your relationship with time and getting rid of some of those many to-dos. Journaling, if you like to write. 10 months after Kate died, my son was killed. And that was obviously a very difficult time for me. And I found that I simply didn't have it in me to actually journal, but I knew that I had to get this stuff out. So what I did instead, and this is not a plug for Pinterest, it's just what I did, I started what do they call it? Started a board of quotes, ideas, thoughts about grief, about your loved ones, about lessons that I had while my son was still alive, lessons that I was taking from the experience of grief, grieving his death and Kate's death that came so closely together. And that is how that's what I did instead of journaling, was finding these wonderful quotes. Some were a little sad, but many of them were very inspiring. And at that point, I certainly could not have found any inspiration within myself. I was too beaten down and too sad. So that's what I did. So I'm just going to throw that out to you. We hear about journaling a lot, and it's a great thing to do. But if you're not a writer, or if you find yourself just not being able to start, consider perhaps putting together some kind of a board. And what you may find is, as you read through some of this stuff, some of these quotes, it may take your head somewhere else that you hadn't even thought about before. So those are just a few very quick things that you can do to get out from underneath this thing with the craziness that we have around in our lives because of our time crunch. So that piece is a big piece, and I would love to have more time to talk about it, but I don't. But a very natural place to go from this is to the issue of mistakes that I mentioned earlier. I believe that that's a place where reframing is desperately needed. A mistake should not be a black mark on your soul. And if you are beating yourself up for mistakes, I beg you to not do that, to stop and think about, to reframe what a mistake is. A mistake is an opportunity to learn. That's all it is. It's just an opportunity to make a different choice. It can be planting a seed of wonderful growth if you stop and consider it as that and not as just some terrible black mark against you. So reframing what you believe a mistake to be can give you can infuse the power you already have, can pump you full of even more power. If you think about when you make a mistake, stepping back and asking yourself, how could I think about this differently? What can I learn from this? And sometimes you may decide that you're going to just let go of. You're not going to worry about it. That's not something you want to bring into your life. Other times you may find that, you know what, this is something that I would like to work on. But take a look at those mistakes. Don't just dismiss them as black marks against your soul, because there's all kinds of messages in there that you can learn from. So I really encourage you to do that. I touched on the idea, and I know I'm pushing my time here, so I'm going to try to make some of my comments as quickly as I can. I mentioned the idea of tips, tricks, and strategies as perhaps, in my opinion, not being the best place to start. I don't think that those recipes support our wholeness, our mind, body, and spirit, which I believe that continuity of those three, the relationship, the connection between those three, is left out too often in this crazy modern world of ours. So I think that, in my opinion, again, I don't like to start there. And many of my clients have discovered that, and it was from them, that's where so many ahas come, that, you know what, I got the system down, I'm cranking it out, but I really don't feel that much better about myself. You know, I still have this picture of myself. That hasn't changed. So I think we need to switch that in terms of where we start our work towards intentional growth. And when we're thinking about our to-dos, or we're thinking about putting some systems in place and some tips that are going to work for us, values clarification is so important, because that's about finding who am I really, what is important to me, what is my core value. If all else went away, what would I not want to lose? What do I hold the dearest in my heart and soul that makes me who I am? Figuring out those values is absolutely essential to our intentional self-growth. So again, I would not presume to tell anybody what path to take. I just encourage you to consider the fact that if you have been working on strategies in your life, but you are not feeling like yourself, your real self, has had an opportunity to grow or change that much, consider the fact that perhaps you're starting at the wrong place. And again, I'm not going to tell you that that's exactly what's happening, but I believe that it might be what's happening. And that really, those are sort of the highlights of what I wanted to share with you this afternoon. And I am going to ask that we switch to the next slide that I'm going to try to segue out of here with. And I want to do that by mentioning I've mentioned very quickly about the body-mind connection, and I would love to spend all day talking about that, because there's so much value in there in terms of your personal choices and how they can help support you in making that life, designing that life that you want, that fulfills you. Now, none of this precludes our need to address those challenge areas in our life. Those are there. They're there. They are what they are. It is what it is. But that doesn't mean that we can't at the same time create a life that gives us more value, that honors our values better. And this last slide is about that. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, and is a gift that you have, that I have, during our journey of self-discovery. And it doesn't matter what those mistakes say about you. That is absolutely not important. That is not who you are. At core, you are a perfect, loving being. And I have 2 bookmarks that I made for myself. One which says, "You alone are enough. You have nothing to prove to anybody." And finally, the greatest challenge of the human experience is discovering who you really are. The second greatest is living in a way that honors what you discovered. And that really, that's sort of the underpinning of what I wanted to share with you today. And because I said that I would, I'm going to very, very briefly mention that. The research that was alluded to earlier is really very exciting. There's a wonderful webinar that you can listen to yourself. The whole webinar is about this research. The thumbnail sketches that the long-standing belief in science that we are the result of genetics, that we are ruled by genetics, that don't even try to change because you got your genes to deal with. We're finding that that is simply not true, that there are many other things happening, including the influence of the environment that we really never looked at before. And the reason I didn't mention that is inside that information is another empowerment for us. We are not the result of our genes. We don't have to say, oh, well, can't do anything about it. We have more power than we think we have. So I have to, I'm over time, and I sort of do that, and I appreciate your, well, of course, you're not in the audience, so you can't wave your hand and tell me I'm at time.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that you listened, and I hope that it's meaningful to you.
Lots and lots of questions, so I think you've really touched on some things that are really important to our listeners. Peggy, thank you so much. Let's start with the questions. Anyone who wants to post a question for Peggy, please do so now. I have lots of questions, but I'd love to hear from more of you. And for those of you who were asking about the webinar that Peggy was just referring to, I believe it's probably those by Joel Nigg. Is that correct, Peggy?
There was I was going to get that name, and I didn't get around to it. There's another one, I believe. Goodness, I'm blanking on the name. But I think that if you did a search on new research or something like that, you'd probably find it. I want to say it started with an H.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. On Attitude, we've had two webinars recently from Joel Nigg, PhD, who has specifically addressed the latest research and specifically why nutrition, diet, exercise are actually extremely important for changing ADHD symptoms. And so it may not be the specific one you were referring to, but it's certainly one that I can refer people to.
That's great.
And
That's
we'll
great.
ask Janice to type in for everyone how to find those webinars. So much that you said here is so fascinating. I think what you were talking about, the core of it, if I understand you correctly, and it so resonates with me, and I'm sure with everyone listening, is that the quest of busyness keeps us from really addressing what our values actually are, because being busy becomes the end in and of itself. And of course, we all feel behind all the time and disorganized. And so some of the questions a couple of people have posted, which I love these questions, are I get really anxious when I'm not doing anything, or how do you fight the fear of not being busy? And this person says something that, boy, do I agree with this one. It's the feeling I get when I'm early to anything. So one of the reasons I think I'm oftentimes late is the terrible fear that I'll be there early with nothing to do. So how do we focus on addressing this fear of lack of busyness?
I love it. That's great. And I feel exactly the same way, and I've complained about that a number of times to people. Oh, darn it, I'm on time. Now what am I going to do? I think that there's no question that the things that I've shared, these are big things. These are things that, especially, I'm almost 70 years old, so I've been at this for a very long time, processing some of these things. And I think that that's one thing that is so important, is to remember that this is a process. You are a work in progress, a perfect work in progress, but you're a work in progress, and it takes time. One of those things that I mentioned about, and I think I mentioned mindfulness, if I didn't, I should have, practicing mindfulness, being in this moment, if we can work at that, and it is a practice. It is a practice, and that's the other thing that I ask my clients to do is come up with a ritual for yourself that you do every single day without fail. Because it's the practicing of it that starts to interrupt those feelings and thoughts that keep popping into our head. It starts to give us a different come from. It helps us feel more at peace with ourselves, so that some of that push that we feel is lessened, because very often that push is coming or has come from outside ourselves. So by doing some of that centering, in the moment work, meditation, which yes, you can, whether or not you have ADD, I'm talking about 5-minute meditation can make a huge change if you keep at it, if you practice. So I know that's not a quick, easy answer, but it really is about, I think, using spiritual principles of mindfulness, centering, doing something for someone else. That's a different kind of doing. Being of service. Those kinds of things can support your brain, which is trying to be busy, to become quieter.
Okay.
And also make sure that you give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to grow. It's a process. You're on a journey. There's no destination. It's a journey. And give yourself permission to do that journey.
I think that giving yourself permission makes a lot of sense, because a number of people are pointing to the fact that they feel guilty if they're not doing something. They feel that they feel shamed because of having ADHD and not having things done. In your experience, how do people help address the guilt and the shame, adults with ADHD, that are so common among adults with ADHD? Again,
I believe that that is the work of the inner critic that we all have. And he's a nasty thing, that inner critic. He's a judge. It's the judge that lives inside us. We didn't create that judge. That's where our thinking is. That judge was out there somewhere. But we allowed that judge, and of course as children we don't have much choice. We've taken on somebody else's description of us, characterization of us, and that is a very hard nut to crack. It takes a lot of work to get past your beliefs, but I think that what's operating here, what's sourcing this, is those fears that were created by those faulty beliefs that we have, that someone else gave us, that we took on. And we don't realize that. We don't think about it. We don't look at it as an issue, a challenge to take on. We're too busy doing our to-dos. But this is a huge challenge. And if you can have a coach or someone who can support you in looking at those beliefs, what is in that? Where did that belief come from? Because if we can start dismantling those beliefs, then we can cut through and figure out, this is why I'm afraid. I was always told this. I believe this to be true. When we start investigating and get inside and under that inner critic, I think that there is just a storehouse of information that we can use to support our own work and getting beyond these fears that tie us up in knots. I think that that's where they come from. Okay, that's great. Just an editorial comment here from Michael, who says he wanted to tell you that your book was the first one he read after his diagnosis, and he wants to say thank you in virtuality, because you sent him in a new direction, and he's forever grateful. So nice comment. Nice from yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to say that. I appreciate it. It has been just such a blessing in my life. I can't even begin to tell you. Thank you.
So here's a practical question. There are sort of 2 or 3 variations on this question from different people, so I'll sort of summarize it. And here's what it is. It's sort of like, I hear what you're saying, being mindful and focusing on values and so forth, but I can't keep my house neat and clean. And when it's not neat and clean, I feel really scattered and anxious, and it's really hard to focus. So what should I do?
That is a huge question, a valid question, and I appreciate it being asked. I think that is sort of the question of our lives in this century and this time in modern history. How do we do that? With all the pressures that are on us, how do we do that? My quick answer is not easily. I would not presume to tell you that anything that I said is a quick, down and dirty way to approach this, or that you are going to have any quick answers. It simply does not work that way. Mm-hmm. However, because it's a process, the more that we can remind ourselves that we are works in progress, and it's okay if I feel this way. That's all right. That's not a bad thing. That's not a judgment call against me. This is what happened. This is what's so. So part of the work is about giving yourself permission to accept what is so. This is so. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. It's just what is so. You are the sum total of your experiences and your thoughts to this point in your life. So, okay, this is what's so. Is this what you want to be so? If not, then you're going to get busy working, and it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while to get rid of some of those feelings. Again, my guess is and I could be wrong. I don't believe that you came into the world wanting a clean house. I believe that that is a belief that came from somewhere. Not that it's bad. I am in no way making you wrong for having it, because we all have those kinds of things going on in our head. But I believe that that is another one of those situations where we've taken something on that may or may not be our own. And maybe it is your own, and that's okay. Absolutely okay. But that doing that work to decide, is this an inner critic kind of thing? Is this something that I absolutely hold to be true? You got to make that determination. So that's where it all starts, because that lets you know, that sources the direction that you take afterwards. So I think you have to start there. So again, this is not a quick, easy answer, but keeping in mind that you have a right to your feelings, you have a right to that belief, you can give yourself permission for being who you are. That's okay. Absolutely okay. Don't make yourself wrong for it, because that is so important for us to do, is to help start getting out from underneath some of the baggage that we have that other people have given us. And then to do it very, very slowly. If you have to have 100% clean house, maybe it would work in your paradigm to have a 95% clean house. What would that look like? I actually had a client that was what we worked on for months. We started out like at 95 because he was very obsessional. And we just kept working down. What would a 50% result look like? I would suggest that you think about trying that and see if that helps over time as part of your process.
All right, that sounds great. I wanted you to talk a bit more about the mind-body connection that you mentioned, and specifically there are some questions which I think are probably related to that topic, about exercise, about nutrition, about sleep, and your thoughts on any of those components of the mind-body connection and how those habits could be changed, or what you advise in terms of addressing exercise, sleep, and nutrition.
Absolutely essential, an essential part, because we are spiritual beings, my belief. We are spiritual beings. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, and that human experience includes our bodies, how we take care of those bodies, how we honor those bodies. That's part of us celebrating the unique self that we are, and that is absolutely essential. And I think and encourage my clients, make sure that when you are getting your daily rituals in place, that you are leaving time to address every piece of yourself. And that means the physical, what you eat, how you exercise. And again, this is not about comparing it to someone else. I think that's where we shoot ourselves in the foot and bring everything to a crashing halt when we bring those comparisons in. For you, right now, where you are, and maybe exercise right now is walking out the front door, down 2 houses, and walking back again. That's okay. But it's about shifting your attention to that as being a very important part of who you are. It is supporting that perfect spirit that's inside you. So physical is extremely important, as is our mind. And I don't want to leave the impression that I think that our thinking, our minds, there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. They're wonderful. They're brilliant machines. I'm astonished by the mind and the brain. And those are 2 separate things that I don't really have time to address right now, that are part of the people that I work with. It's wonderful. Honor it. Give yourself time to read if that is important to you. Give yourself time to write if that is important to you. It is honoring your body, your mind, as well as your spirit, because when you are honoring your body and honoring your brain, your mind, your thinking mind, you have a better chance of getting inside in the quiet and hearing that perfect being that's inside you and the whispers that we often miss in our busyness. So those three things are absolutely essentially interrelated, and it is up to us, if we're going to honor ourselves, to address each of those three pieces.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So here now a real super practical question from Debbie. She says, I have a really hard time arriving on time for an event. When I arrive on time, I feel great and my whole day is fantastic. When I arrive late, the rest of my day is a black cloud. Do you have any suggestions or exercises to help better manage time? And thank you, she says, for taking the time to speak here today.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate her taking the time to be here. That question, as if I had a dime for every time.
Really?
Very, very, very rich. And it was an issue for me for years. So I'm really glad it was asked. I'd love to have the rest of the afternoon to respond. But I can tell you very briefly, there's two pieces to this. One is actually three. One is our general approach to time, our relationship with time, and that's more of a philosophical one, but that's part of it. The other one is the down and dirty of time, what it says on the clock. Factoring in, which I never used to do, I have to leave at 9. Okay, now I'm sitting in my car in the driveway. Why is it 10 after 9? I walked out the door at 9. Not taking into consideration that time doesn't stop. It keeps on moving. We can't aim ourselves yet. So whenever we forget that those transitions, and that's where I think a lot of us get hung up, is in the transition. We fail to plan time for the transition. And that, I think, is one very quick way to answer this, is making sure that you are paying attention not only to the time that you have to be somewhere and the time that's going to take to get there, but all of the transitions in between before you ever even start thinking about leaving. I think we leave that out a lot. And the last thing I say very quickly is, I would not have believed it if I hadn't done it. I actually took about 2 years and I taught myself to tell time. I didn't believe that it could be done. I literally wanted to have a better idea of what time. Because in my world, it could be 6 a.m. It could be the middle of the night, except in the darkness, I was just different. I didn't like that. It made me feel out of control. So I started a very serious practice every single day of noting throughout the day at specific times, looking up, what does the clock say, closing my eyes, internalizing that time, getting a feeling sense of what that time meant to me, and I do that day after day after day after day. I almost had it nailed. I can almost tell you from the other room without a clock what time it is. I could never have done that before. So
wow.
I think the point is that we have more power than we think we have. And you can train, you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah, that's really inspirational. What you're saying is just tackle that one. And I guess a lot of what I hear you saying is the problem for all of us of understanding how long things really do take. So part of, I think, if I hear you correctly, what you're advocating is take some time to actually note how long things take.
I'd walk around with a timer and write it down, literally.
That's really interesting. I want to just share a couple of tips or comments that people have noted here because I think they're helpful. One person said she decided that her living room, kitchen, dining room, and family room can be clean 95% of the time, and her bedroom will be clean 75% of the time, and her office is where she allows clutter. And so I think what you're saying, she made a decision that that strategy would be okay, and that's what she's going to follow. I thought that was an interesting one I wanted to share with the group.
That's fantastic, and that's what we need to be about, is being at choice, whatever that choice is. And
right, this is my choice.
Right. To anybody.
Right. And then similarly on the time question, a couple of people have noted that that the concept of transition time is really important. And one person says she knows someone who allots 45 minutes extra in order to allow for delays and transition time. And someone else says formalized transition time. This is really huge. So
That's perfect.
2 tips for people.
Great tip.
And then a great comment who said, I hear what you're saying about making choices, and I just made the choice to hire a cleaning service.
Congratulations.
Good for you.
That's great.
Absolutely. That was really great. So I think that we are pretty much out of time, unfortunately. Let me just look and see. I guess we have maybe 5 minutes. There are a number of questions here. I don't know whether we want to go here because it's a big topic, but about the reactions of other people. So how do I talk about ADHD with my supervisors? And a physician who posts that a number of her clients are increasingly embarrassed when they go to collect their medication at the pharmacy because they feel that they're being treated as, you know, some sort of second-class citizens. So I guess dealing with stigma is really the topic here, and I wonder if you have any comments on that.
It's huge, and I think that's part of our work, and I think that really underscores where I was going when I was talking about looking at who we are and not putting all of our focus on just those, getting tips in place to help us with our challenges, but looking at the whole self. And for many of us, that is a self that has been subjected to that we've allowed, I'm going to rephrase that we have allowed objective thoughts from others to get in and define us. Because everything that you just mentioned, those are not truths. Those are those things that we have allowed into our consciousness and decided that they are truths. They're not. And that's why it's so important to keep doing the work on our thoughts and how it operates, and keep asking yourself, now wait a second, do I really think this, or did I get this from someone else and put a frame around it in some way, or did someone else put a frame around it? And I think that 9 times out of 10, it's not a truth that we're talking about. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there aren't that many real truths. There are our interpretations. And that's why I think so much of our work needs to be about stepping back and digging through that. Where is that thinking coming from? I didn't think that on the day I was born. Where is that coming from? Because if we can get a handle on that, then we can start making some choices about not believing it, not going with it anymore, not using that as part of the way we characterize ourselves.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to have to end. Peggy, perhaps you could give your email address, cite that now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I encourage anyone with any additional questions. If you are looking to get into coaching, I'd be happy to talk to you about what that means, not just with me, but just in general. So my email address is probably the best way to reach me, and it's an easy one. It's just Coach, all one word, Coach Peggy Ramundo, and my last name is Ramundo @gmail.com.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to tell the listeners that we have Linda Rogley, a wonderful speaker, on October 31st talking about You Are Stronger Than You Think, a guide to empowering women with ADHD. And on November 7, entrepreneurs and ADHD, a great topic. And then on November 14, motivation, always a great topic for everyone. So come back, folks, and listen to our webinars. We're pleased to provide them. They're available on replay on attitudemag.com, and as many of you know, as downloadable podcasts on iTunes. So we're going to end now with our thanks, Peggy, for such a great and inspirational session, and thanks to all of our listeners. Great questions from everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again here at Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.